Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The Hogwarts kitchen lived by its own particular rhythm, even in the deepest hours of night. The quiet crackling of fires in the stone hearths, the barely audible bubbling of potions in large cauldrons where tomorrow's dishes were preparing, and the monotonous ticking of the old clock on the wall created a symphony that usually soothed all the inhabitants of the castle's underground chambers. But not Winky. The small house elf sat in the furthest corner of the kitchen, where the shadows were thickest and the light from the fireplace barely reached. Her large, once bright eyes now resembled tarnished emeralds, and her thin fingers trembled as she lifted another goblet of butterbeer to her lips. The liquid was warm, sweetish, and most importantly, it helped her forget. At least for a while. Winky is not supposed to, she muttered to herself, as she had been doing for months. Winky is bad elf. Winky lost her place. Winky is not worthy. Her voice faded, dissolving into the general hum of the kitchen. The other house elves had long since stopped paying attention to her mumblings. At first they had tried to help, but Winky pushed away all attempts at approach with such determination that even the most persistent of them eventually gave up. Professor Dumbledore had been kind, too kind, Winky thought. He had given her work at Hogwarts, a roof over her head, but what did it change? She was free, the word that burned worse than any cursed dark wizards could utter. Free, abandoned, unwanted. Around her, work was bustling. Dobby, the same Dobby who had once served the Malfoys, now fussed about large chestnuts, preparing them for tomorrow's breakfast. His eyes glowed with joy, that happiness which Winky simply could not understand. How could one rejoice in freedom? How could one smile when they had lost their purpose? Dobby thinks Winky should taste the new honey cakes, he said, approaching with a plate in his hands. His voice was careful, warm, but Winky heard something else in it too, pity. And that was the worst thing. Pity from someone who had himself gone through freedom and managed to find joy in that curse. Winky does not want cakes, she grumbled, not lifting her gaze. Winky only wants. But what did she want? To return to serving Mr. Crouch? To that man who had cast her off for one mistake? Or did she simply want to disappear, dissolve into shadows like dusty powder from old books? Dobby understands, Dobby said quietly, placing the plate beside her on the floor. Dobby once thought the world had ended too. But then Dobby realized. Do not compare yourself to Winky, she exclaimed sharply, and several house elves turned in their direction. You wanted freedom. You fought for it. But Winky was a good elf, and now Winky is nothing. Dobby flinched but did not move away. His large eyes looked at Winky with such compassionate wisdom that she wanted to scream or run away, or drink even more butterbeer to drown out this feeling of understanding that emanated from him. Winky is not nothing, he said finally. Winky is the best cook Dobby has ever met. Winky knows cooking secrets that even old elves have forgotten. And Winky. Go away, Winky whispered, and there was so much pain in her voice that Dobby immediately fell silent. Just go away. He stood for another moment, then quietly made his way back to his chestnuts. Winky was left alone with her shadows and butterbeer. The clock on the wall struck midnight. The sound echoed through the kitchen with a metallic reverberation, and Winky raised her head. At this hour the kitchen usually grew quiet. Most house elves went to rest, leaving only those on duty who watched over the night dishes. But tonight something was different. Winky listened. Through the usual sounds of the kitchen came something strange, a barely audible creak, like old wood under the weight of time. The sound came from somewhere to her left, from the side of the wall where large copper pots hung. At first she thought it was just the old castle settling. Hogwarts was full of strange sounds, especially at night. But the creak repeated, and this time Winky noticed that one of the pots was swaying almost imperceptibly. The butterbeer had clouded her mind, but curiosity proved stronger than indifference. Winky slowly got to her feet, swayed, and approached the wall. The pots hung on old iron hooks mounted directly into the stone masonry. But when she looked more carefully, she noticed that one section of the wall looked somewhat different. The stones were slightly lighter, as if they had once been replaced. Winky reached out and touched the wall. The stone was cold under her fingers, but when she pressed harder, she felt it give way slightly inward. Her heart began to beat faster. In all the months of being in the kitchen, she had never noticed anything like this. Looking around and making sure no one was paying attention to her, Winky removed the pot from its hook and placed it on the floor. Now she could better examine the wall. Indeed, there was something strange here, a rectangular area about the size of a book, where the stones were laid slightly differently. The magic of house elves allowed them to sense hidden things, especially those relating to home and household. And now Winky felt that behind this wall was something old, forgotten, but still present. She pressed her palm to the center of the rectangle and concentrated. Her magic, weakened by months of despair and butterbeer, still responded. The stones shuddered, and one of them, the one in the center, slowly began to sink inward. "What are you doing?" came a familiar voice behind her. Winky jumped and spun around sharply. Behind her stood Dobby, with a plate of biscuits in his hands and a worried expression on his face. "And nothing," Winky stammered. Winky was just, the pot fell. But Dobby was no fool. He came closer and looked at the wall, where now a small niche about 10 centimeters deep was visible. "Dobby has never seen this before," he said quietly. "And Dobby has been working here for 2 years." Winky wanted to tell him to go away, as she always did, but curiosity proved stronger. Besides, the alcohol had dulled her usual wariness. "There is something there," she whispered, pointing to the niche. "Winky can feel it." Dobby set his plate on the floor and approached. His large eyes glowed with curiosity. Together they peered into the niche and saw there a small wooden box, darkened with age. "Magic," Dobby said, drawing in air. "Old magic. Very old." Winky reached out and carefully extracted the box. It was heavier than it seemed, and Winky felt thin threads of magical energy running through the wood. The box was of simple workmanship, without ornaments, but on the lid were carved runes that Winky could not read. "Open it," Dobby whispered. Winky shook her head. Winky should not. This is not her thing. "But you found it," Dobby insisted. "Perhaps it was waiting just for you." This thought seemed absurd to Winky. Nothing was waiting for her. She was a freed elf, abandoned and unwanted. But her hands reached for the box of their own accord. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters, neatly tied with a yellowed ribbon. The paper was old, but well preserved thanks to the box's magic. On the top letter, written in an elegant hand, Winky read words that took her breath away. "Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin writes to you from his new dwelling to inform you that he has settled well after his freedom from your house last month." Freedom. That word again. But here it did not sound like a curse. Here it was part of an ordinary sentence, written in a calm, even satisfied tone. "Pippin," Dobby whispered, looking over Winky's shoulder. "Who is that?" Winky unfolded the letter completely with trembling fingers. The date indicated 1978, just over 20 years ago. "Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin writes to you from his new dwelling in the London district of Diagon Alley to inform you that he has settled well after his freedom from your house last month. Pippin knows that you were concerned about his fate and wishes to ease your heart. Pippin has found work at St. Mungo's Hospital as an assistant in the Magical Accidents Department. His duties include caring for sick creatures and preparing healing potions. Pippin uses the knowledge of domestic magic that he learned while serving your family, and the healers say his help is invaluable. Pippin also wants to say that he bears no grudge for the freedom. Pippin understands that Mr. Dalberton did this not from anger, but from concern for Pippin's future. And although at first it was frightening and unfamiliar, now Pippin sees the wisdom in this decision. At the hospital there are other freed house elves. They gather every evening in a small room beneath the kitchen and share their stories. Pippin has learned that he is not the only one who has found new purpose after serving in a wizard's house. Pippin would be glad to receive a reply from Mr. Dalberton, if he has the time and desire. Pippin also sends his best wishes to Mrs. Dalberton and little Miss Agatha. With respect and gratitude, Pippin. Winky read the letter twice, not believing her own eyes. A house elf was writing letters. A freed house elf was writing letters to his former master. And not only writing, he was thanking for his freedom. "This is impossible," she whispered. "House elves do not. Freed elves do not." "Do not what?" Dobby asked quietly. Winky could not answer. Everything she had believed throughout her life, everything she knew about the nature of house elves, was suddenly called into question. Freed house elves did not find new work. They were not happy. They did not write letters full of optimism and gratitude. But here was proof to the contrary lying in her hands. "Dobby," she said, and her voice trembled. "Are there more letters?" Dobby looked into the box and nodded. Many letters, all from Pippin. Winky carefully placed the first letter back and took the next one. The date, 2 months later. Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin is very glad to receive your reply. Pippin is happy to know that you are feeling well and that Miss Agatha has recovered from her cough. Pippin has wonderful news. The head healer, Mr. Mendicen, has allowed Pippin to create his own potion for treating magical exhaustion. Pippin used an ancient recipe that he knew from the family tradition of house-elves and added several ingredients that he learned about at the hospital. The result exceeded all expectations. Mr. Mendicen says that Pippin has a healer's talent. He even suggested that Pippin study formal healing magic. Pippin has not yet decided, but this proposal is very flattering to him. Pippin has also befriended a witch named Cordelia Fogg, who works in the Department of Accidents with magical creatures. She says that Pippin has a unique gift for calming injured creatures. Last week Pippin helped her treat a dragon that had burned its wing in a skirmish with Aurors. The letter continued, telling of Pippin's daily life, his work, new friends. The tone was relaxed, almost cheerful. This was the voice of someone who had found their place in the world. Winky felt something stir in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced for months. Curiosity. No, more than curiosity. Hope. Was that too bold even to think such a word? Winky, Dobby said quietly, perhaps we should take the box and read all the letters? Not here, where others might see. Winky nodded, not trusting her own voice. Dobby was right. They needed a place where they could read peacefully, without attracting attention. Where? She asked hoarsely. Dobby knows a place, he replied. A small room near the laundry. No one goes there at night. Together they carefully placed the box back in the niche, and then Dobby muttered something under his breath, and the stone returned to its place. The wall looked ordinary again. Tomorrow evening? Dobby asked. Winky nodded. For the first time in months, she felt something other than dull pain in her chest. Perhaps it was just the butterbeer affecting her so, but it seemed to her that in the darkness of her life a thin strip of light had appeared. That night Winky could not sleep for a long time. She lay on her thin mattress in the house-elves' room and thought about Pippin. Who had he been? How had he ended up in the Hogwarts kitchen? Why had he hidden his letters in the wall? And most importantly, how had he managed to find happiness after freedom? Winky had always believed that freedom was the end of everything. The end of purpose, the end of meaning in life, the end of herself. But Pippin wrote about a new life, new work, new friends. He wrote as if freedom were not an end, but a beginning. Could this be true? Could she, Winky, find something similar? She pushed these thoughts away. She was not Pippin. She had betrayed Mr. Crouch's trust. She did not deserve a second life. But even these gloomy thoughts could not completely silence the new feeling that had been born in her heart. Tomorrow she would learn more about the mysterious Pippin. Tomorrow she would read more letters. And for the first time in long months, Winky fell asleep without thinking about butterbeer. The next day passed according to the usual schedule. Winky cleaned, washed dishes, prepared vegetables for lunch. But all these actions she performed mechanically, thinking only of the evening and the box in the wall. Dobby tried several times to speak with her, but Winky answered briefly, not wanting to draw the attention of other house-elves to their secret. But when their gazes met, a spark of understanding ran between them. When the kitchen finally grew quiet and most of the house-elves had gone to sleep, Dobby approached Winky. Ready, he whispered. Winky nodded. Together they approached the wall with the pots. Dobby removed one of them, and Winky touched the stone. The niche opened easily, as if waiting for them. They carried the box out carefully, holding it to their chests like the most precious treasure. The small room near the laundry was empty and quiet. Dobby lit an old lamp, and warm light spread across the walls. Now, he said, sitting on the floor opposite Winky, we can read peacefully. Winky opened the box and took the next letter. Her hands no longer trembled. Curiosity had overcome alcohol and depression. Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin writes to you on his birthday. Today he turned 50. Pippin remembers how Mr. Dalberton always gave him a small gift on this day, usually soft mittens or a warm scarf for winter. This year Pippin gave himself something special. He bought his own room in a house on Charing Cross Road, not far from the entrance to Diagon Alley. It is a small room under the roof, but it has a window from which you can see the sky and its own hearth, by which Pippin can sit in the evenings. Pippin never thought he would have his own home. When Mr. Dalberton freed him, Pippin thought he would live under bridges or in dark alleys. But it turned out that the world is much larger and kinder than he imagined. At the hospital, Pippin has been promoted. Now he is chief assistant in the magical exhaustion department, and 3 young healers work under his guidance. Pippin teaches them ancient healing methods that only house elves know. Mr. Mendicen says that Pippin should write a book about domestic healing magic. Pippin has not yet decided whether he is ready to share all the secrets of his people, but the idea is very interesting. Pippin also wants to tell Mr. Dalberton about Orchid. This is a house elf girl who ended up in the hospital after an accident with dark magic. Her masters rejected her, saying she brings misfortune. Pippin took her under his wing and helped her recover not only physically, but spiritually. Now Orchid works together with Pippin, and she has become like a younger sister to him. Pippin thinks that Mr. Dalberton will understand this feeling. After all, he once cared for Pippin like a family member. Pippin hopes this letter finds Mr. Dalberton in good health. Pippin often thinks about the old house and the good times they spent together. With best wishes, Pippin. P.S. Pippin sends his new recipe for healing soup. Mr. Dalberton may use it if anyone in the family has a cold. A small card with a detailed recipe written in Pippin's neat handwriting was attached to the letter. Winky looked at the letter for a long time without saying a word. 50 years. Pippin had been older than her, and he had not only survived after freedom, he had flourished. He had his own home, work that he enjoyed, and he even helped other freed house elves. He bought his own room, she whispered finally. He lives alone, and he likes it. Dobby nodded. Pippin sounds very happy, and he still writes to his old master. This means they parted on good terms. Winky took the next letter, but before unfolding it, she looked at Dobby. Why did you never tell me that freedom could be like this? She asked. Dobby sighed. Dobby did tell you, many times, but Winky did not want to listen. This was true. All these months Dobby had tried to talk to her, but Winky had pushed away all his attempts to help. She had been too focused on her own grief to hear anyone else. Pippin would not write such letters if he were unhappy, she continued, talking more to herself than to Dobby. And he would not worry about other house elves if he himself were suffering. Winky unfolded the next letter and saw that it was dated 3 years later. Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin writes to you with joyful news. Mr. Mendicen has proposed that Pippin head a new department, the Rehabilitation Center for Freed House Elves at St. Mungo's Hospital. This will be the first official institution in the magical world designed to help house elves who have lost their masters. Pippin will be the director, and Orchid will be his deputy. Pippin is very excited, but also proud. This means that soon he will have the opportunity to help many house elves find new life, as he once found it himself. Pippin will never forget that it was Mr. Dalberton who gave him this chance by freeing him. Then Pippin did not understand, but now he sees that this was the greatest gift a house elf could receive, the opportunity to find his true purpose. Pippin hopes that Mr. Dalberton is proud that his former house elf has been able to achieve such heights. Pippin tries to be worthy of the trust that Mr. Dalberton once placed in him. The opening ceremony will take place next month. Pippin would be very glad if Mr. Dalberton and his family could attend. With boundless gratitude, Pippin. Winky felt something tighten in her throat. Pippin had not only found happiness after freedom, he had dedicated his life to helping other house elves walk the same path. And he still considered freedom a gift, not a curse. Rehabilitation Center, she whispered. He created a place where other house elves could. Her voice trailed off. She thought about all the months she had spent locked in her own grief, pushing away Dobby's help and that of others. And somewhere in the world, there had existed a house elf who had made helping others his life's calling. Dobby, she said, raising her eyes from the letter, what if? But before she could finish the thought, the sound of footsteps reached the room. Heavy, human footsteps. Dobby and Winky froze, listening as someone approached their section of corridor. It's a teacher, Dobby whispered. We must hide the letters. Winky quickly folded the letter and shoved it back into the box. Dobby extinguished the lamp, and they pressed against the wall in the darkness, hoping that someone was just passing by. But the footsteps stopped right at the door of their little room. Then a familiar voice sounded. Dobby? Winky? I know you are there. It was Professor Dumbledore. Dobby sighed and relit the lamp. In the doorway stood the headmaster of Hogwarts, dressed in a long nightgown, with a gentle smile on his face. Good evening, he said kindly. Forgive me for disturbing you so late, but I noticed that unusual magical fluctuations were occurring in the kitchen. Winky pressed the box tighter to her chest. She was afraid that Dumbledore would take their find away, would say that they had no right to read other people's letters. But the headmaster only looked at the box with interest. "Ah," he said quietly, "you have found Pippin's treasure. I thought it was lost forever." "You knew about it?" Dobby was surprised. Dumbledore entered the room and sat down on a low box opposite them. "Pippin was a house elf of one of the ancient wizarding families over 40 years ago," he explained. "The Dalberton family had a mansion near Hogwarts, and Pippin often helped at the castle during big events. When he began to age, he decided to dedicate himself to helping other house elves. But he wrote that he was freed by Mr. Dalberton," Winky objected. "Johannes Dalberton was a renowned researcher of magical potions," Dumbledore explained. "Pippin often helped him in his laboratory during his visits to Hogwarts. When Pippin decided to seek a new life, Professor Dalberton formally freed him so that he could obtain official status in the magical world. It was an act of friendship, not punishment." Winky felt her worldview shake again. Pippin had not been freed because he had done something bad. He had been freed to give him more opportunities. "And the letters?" Dobby asked. "Why are they hidden in the wall?" Dumbledore smiled. "Pippin was a very private person. When he was leaving his work near Hogwarts, he said he was leaving something for future generations of house-elves who might need inspiration. He sealed the box with magic so that it would open only for someone who truly needed help." The headmaster looked directly at Winky. "It seems Pippin's box has been waiting just for you, Winky." Winky felt tears fill her eyes. For the first time in months, these were not tears of grief, but something else. Relief. Hope. "Professor," she whispered, may we read all the letters?" "Of course," Dumbledore nodded. "Pippin left them for just this purpose. But remember, these are not just stories. These are lessons about how life does not end with freedom. It only begins." He got up and headed for the door, but on the threshold he turned back. "Winky," he said quietly, "your culinary magic abilities are truly unique. Perhaps it is time to think about how you could share them with others." When the headmaster's footsteps had faded in the corridor, Winky and Dobby sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Winky opened the box again. "One more letter?" Dobby suggested gently. Winky nodded and took the next sheet. This letter was shorter than the previous ones, and the handwriting looked slightly shaky. "Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin writes to you from his hospital bed. Pippin caught magical fever while treating a dragon, but the healers say he will recover. During his illness, Pippin thought much about his life. Pippin is happy that he could live it as he wanted. Pippin regrets nothing, neither the service in your house, nor the freedom, nor the years at the hospital. Pippin wants Mr. Dalberton to know. Everything Pippin achieved began on the day when Mr. Dalberton gave him freedom of choice. Pippin learned that freedom is not abandonment. It is the opportunity to decide how to live one's life. Pippin hopes that someday other house elves will understand this too. With love and gratitude, Pippin." Winky set aside the letter and wept. But these were different tears, not bitter like all the previous months, but cleansing. She wept for the time lost to self-pity, for all the opportunities she had missed by plunging into depression, for Dobby, whom she had pushed away, though he had only tried to help. "Winky," Dobby said quietly, "is everything all right?" She raised her head and looked at him. Dobby was watching her with such care and understanding that her heart clenched with remorse. "Dobby was right," she whispered. All these months Dobby tried to tell Winky the same thing that Pippin wrote. But Winky did not want to listen. "Is Winky ready to listen now?" Dobby asked gently. Winky nodded. "Winky is ready. Winky wants to learn. Winky wants." She paused, searching for words. "What does Winky want?" Dobby encouraged. "Winky wants to find her new purpose," she said finally. "Like Pippin, Winky wants to help others." Dobby beamed with happiness. Dobby knew Winky would understand. Dobby always knew Winky was stronger than she thought. Winky took his small hand in her palms. "Forgive Winky," she said sincerely. "Winky was a bad friend." Dobby tried to help, and Winky. "Dobby understands," he interrupted her. Dobby went through the same thing. Freedom is hard, even when it is good. It takes time to understand. They sat in the warm light of the lamp, holding hands, and Winky felt something heavy and dark that had oppressed her heart for months slowly dissolving. "Tomorrow Winky will not drink butterbeer," she said quietly. "And what will Winky do instead?" Dobby asked. Winky looked at the box with Pippin's letters. "Tomorrow Winky will read all the letters," she said determinedly. And then Winky will think about what Professor Dumbledore said, about how to share her knowledge with others. Dobby squeezed her hand. "Dobby will help," he promised. "Dobby will always help." When they returned the box to its place in the wall, Winky felt something she had not felt for months. Anticipation. Anticipation that tomorrow would be better than today, and that the day after tomorrow would be even better. For the first time in a long while, Winky went to bed not drunk on butterbeer, but drunk on possibilities. Pippin's letters had shown her that freedom was not a curse. It was a gift of choice, and tomorrow she would begin to learn how to use that gift. In the darkness of her room, Winky smiled, for the first time in many months. Somewhere out there, in the magical world, lived a house-elf named Pippin who, with his letters, had saved another house-elf from despair. And perhaps, just perhaps, someday she too could do something similar for someone else. Winky awoke earlier than usual. For the first time in months, she did not feel the heaviness in her head from butterbeer. Yesterday's discovery had so captivated her that she had forgotten about her habit of drowning sorrow in alcohol. Instead, her mind was clear and filled with anticipation of something important. She lay on her mattress, listening to how the kitchen gradually awakened. Somewhere far away, knives clicked against chopping boards, cauldrons bubbled, pans sizzled. The usual morning sounds that typically reminded her of her meaningless existence today sounded different, as if a melody had appeared in them, a rhythm she had not noticed before. Pippin. This name would not leave her mind. A house elf who had managed to find new life after freedom, who had not only survived but flourished, helping others, who had written letters full of hope and gratitude instead of drowning in self-pity. Winky slowly got up and looked at her hands. Thin, nimble fingers that had once created culinary wonders for the Crouch family. For months she had considered them a curse. After all, it was these hands that had held Barty Crouch Jr.'s wand at the Quidditch World Cup. But yesterday Dumbledore had said something about her unique culinary magic abilities. "Good morning, Winky." She raised her head and saw Dobby standing at the entrance to the women's dormitory with a big smile on his face. "Dobby woke up early to prepare something special for breakfast," he said. Dobby thought Winky might be hungry this morning. Winky was surprised, realizing that she actually felt hungry. For the first time in many weeks, she wanted to eat, not just drink butterbeer until numbness. "What did Dobby prepare?" she asked, and even her own voice seemed unfamiliar. It lacked the usual apathy. "Porridge with honey and cinnamon," Dobby replied proudly, "and toast with homemade butter, and fresh berries that Dobby collected from Professor Sprout." Together they went to the large kitchen. Most of the house elves were already at work, preparing breakfast for students and teachers. Winky noticed how some of them looked at her with interest. Usually at this time she was still sleeping, and when she finally appeared, she looked gloomy and held a goblet of butterbeer in her hands. Dobby seated her at a small table in a cozy corner and brought a plate of food. The first spoonful of porridge seemed to Winky the most delicious thing she had tasted in recent months. Or perhaps it was simply because she could finally taste flavor, not clouded by alcohol. "Dobby," she said between swallows, "Winky wants to return to the letters tonight. Winky has many questions." Dobby's eyes shone. "Dobby too." Dobby thought all night about Pippin. Dobby wants to know if he really managed to create that center for house elves. "And Winky wants to know more about his friendship with his former master," Winky added. "It seems so impossible. House elves and wizards as equals." Dobby nodded. Dobby thought about this too. When Dobby was with the Malfoys, Dobby could never imagine that he could be friends with a wizard. But then Dobby met Harry Potter. He paused, and Winky saw a warm light of memories in his eyes. "Harry Potter treated Dobby like a friend," he continued quietly. "Not like a servant. Harry Potter valued Dobby for who he was, not for what he could do." Winky pondered these words. She remembered Mr. Crouch, a stern, demanding man who had never looked at her as anything more than a tool for getting work done. But in Pippin's letters, Mr. Dalberton seemed completely different, caring, understanding, capable of true friendship. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "Winky served the wrong wizard." This thought was painful, but at the same time liberating. Perhaps the problem had not been with her, but with the relationship itself. Perhaps she had deserved better treatment. The day passed faster than usual. Winky performed her duties with more attention than she had in recent months. She noticed little things she had previously ignored, how young house elf Timmy was trying to reach a high shelf, how old Pippin was struggling to lift heavy pots, how Winky, a small house elf with large ears, was uncertainly stirring sauce, afraid of spoiling it. For the first time in months, Winky thought not only about herself. And this feeling was strange, but pleasant. When the kitchen finally quieted, and it was time for their secret meeting, Winky felt an impatience that had nothing to do with the desire to drink. She wanted to learn more about Pippin, about his journey, about how he had managed to transform the curse of freedom into a blessing. Together with Dobby, they again made their way to the small room by the laundry. They retrieved the box more confidently now, knowing that Professor Dumbledore did not object to their nightly readings. "Which letter shall we start with?" Dobby asked, lighting the lamp. "Winky wants to read the next one after yesterday's," she replied, opening the box. "Winky wants to know if Pippin recovered from the fever." She took the next letter and unfolded it. The date showed that several months had passed between this and the previous letter. "Dear Mr. Dalberton, Pippin is glad to report that he has fully recovered from the fever. Moreover, the illness brought unexpected benefit. During treatment, Pippin met a house elf named Billy, who has been working at the hospital for 15 years. Billy told Pippin amazing stories about other freed house elves she had met. It turns out there are significantly more of them than Pippin thought. Some work at the Ministry of Magic, others in Diagon Alley shops. There are even those who have opened their own businesses. Billy showed Pippin a secret room in the hospital basement where freed house elves gather once a week. They share experiences, support each other, and even help newcomers find work. Pippin never knew about the existence of such a community. Most interesting is that many of them maintain contact with their former masters. Not all, of course, some freedoms were indeed painful, but those who parted on good terms often remain friends for life. Pippin realized that he is not as unique as he thought. Many house elves have managed to find new happiness after freedom. It's just not customary to speak about this openly. There is some unwritten tradition of silence around this topic. Pippin has begun recording stories of other freed house elves. Perhaps someday he will be able to collect them into a book, so that those who have just received freedom know they are not alone. Mr. Dalberton, Pippin wants to ask your advice. Should he speak openly about his intentions? Pippin fears that some house elves might not understand. Many still consider freedom the worst curse that can befall their people. Pippin hopes for your wisdom. With respect, Pippin. Winky slowly lowered the letter. So there was an entire community of freed house elves. They gathered, supported each other, even helped newcomers. And she had spent all these months thinking she was alone in her grief. "Did Dobby know about such house elves?" she asked quietly. Dobby shook his head. Dobby heard rumors, but Dobby thought they were just rumors. Dobby did not know it was true. "Pippin wants to write a book," Winky said thoughtfully. "A book of stories about freed house elves, so that others would know that new happiness can be found." She fell silent, considering this idea. A book that would show other house elves that freedom was not the end of the world. How much suffering could be prevented? "Shall we read Mr. Dalberton's reply?" Dobby suggested. Winky nodded and took the next letter. This one was written in different handwriting, more elegant letters. "Dear Pippin, I am glad to hear that you have fully recovered. Your fever worried me greatly. I know how dangerous magical illnesses can be for house elves. Your question about the book is extremely important. I think you have not only the right, but the duty to tell the truth about life after freedom. Too many house elves suffer unnecessarily because of false perceptions. However, I would advise you to be careful in your choice of words. Instead of directly condemning traditional views, show the alternative through personal stories. People, and house elves, better accept change when they see examples, not hear sermons. Perhaps you could start with small publications in the Prophet, or create a brochure for distribution at the hospital. Gradual changes often prove more lasting than revolutionary ones. Regarding your personal doubts, do not fear to speak the truth. Your story could save the life of another house elf who is now in despair after freedom. I am proud of you, Pippin. Not as a former master, but as a friend. You are doing something important. With best wishes, Johannes Dalberton. P.S. Agatha asks me to send you her regards. She still remembers your culinary masterpieces and says no one can make cakes like you. Winky felt something warm spreading in her chest. Here it was, an example of true friendship between a wizard and a house elf. Mr. Dalberton was not only giving advice, he truly cared about Pippin. And even his daughter remembered the house elf with warmth. "They are really friends," she whispered. "Not master and servant. Friends." "It is possible," Dobby said quietly. "Dobby knows it is possible. Harry Potter proved this to Dobby." Winky took the next letter. This one was again from Pippin, but dated a year later. "Dear Johannes, Pippin hopes he may call Mr. Dalberton by his first name, as friends do. Pippin is glad to report that his first article has been published in the Prophet. It was a short story about a house elf who opened his own cookery in Diagon Alley after freedom. The editor said readers responded very positively. But most important, 3 house elves who had just received freedom approached Pippin. They read the article and sought advice. Pippin was able to direct them to the community at the hospital, and now all 3 have found work and feel better. This inspired Pippin to write further. He plans a series of articles called New Horizons, stories about house elves who managed to transform freedom into the beginning of a new, better life. Pippin also received a letter from a house elf in Ireland who created a sanctuary for abandoned magical creatures, and another from a house elf in Scotland who became a master maker of magical carpets. It turns out there are very many successful freed house elves in the world. Pippin feels as if he has discovered a whole new world, a world where house elves can be anyone, not just servants. Johannes, Pippin wants to thank you once more, not only for freedom, but for teaching Pippin to think differently. In your house, Pippin first felt that he was valued not only for his work, but for his personality. Perhaps that is why Pippin was able to accept freedom so easily. He already knew what respect felt like. With boundless gratitude, Pippin. P.S. Pippin sends a recipe for a new dish he invented. Phoenix dawn pie with honey, golden apples and spices that recall the warm colors of phoenix feathers. Agatha was right, no one cooks like Pippin. But now Pippin cooks not from duty, but from pleasure. Winky set aside the letter and looked at Dobby. Something appeared in her eyes that had not been there for months. Enthusiasm. Pippin helps other house elves find new life, she said. He writes articles, tells stories. He shows them that freedom is not an end, Dobby added. But a beginning, Winky finished. She fell silent, pondering what she had read. Pippin had not simply found his own happiness. He was helping others find theirs. And most importantly, he was doing this through what he did best. Through cooking. Dobby, she said suddenly, what if? But again she did not finish the thought. The idea being born in her head seemed too bold, too unrealistic. What if what? Dobby gently encouraged. What if Winky could also? She sighed. No, it's absurd. Winky is not as clever as Pippin. Winky cannot write articles. But Winky can cook, Dobby said. Better than anyone Dobby knows. And Winky knows secrets of culinary magic that other elves have never even heard of. Winky looked at her hands. They no longer trembled as they had in the morning. And for the first time in months, she thought of them not as instruments of her shame, but as tools of possible achievements. Pippin said that he cooks now from pleasure, not duty, she said quietly. Winky does not remember when she last cooked from pleasure. Do you want to remember? Dobby asked. Winky thought about this question. Did she want to? Was she ready to try to find joy in what had once brought her satisfaction? Perhaps, she replied finally. But Winky does not know how to begin. Start small, Dobby advised. Tomorrow prepare something special for breakfast. Not because you must, but because you want to. This idea seemed to Winky both simple and frightening. To cook from pleasure meant to open up again. To risk feeling something other than pain and apathy. And if it doesn't work, she whispered. And if it does? Dobby answered question with question. Winky took the next letter, hoping to find more courage in it. This one was especially thick, several sheets sewn together. Dear Johannes, Pippin writes to you with amazing news. Pippin has finally finished his book. New Horizons, Stories of Freed House Elves, is ready for publication. The book contains 20 stories about house elves who found new purpose after freedom. There is a tale about Holly, who became the best magical creature healer in Europe. About Wilfred, who opened a school of culinary magic. About Rosie, who created a network of shelters for abandoned house elves. But the most important story is the last one. Pippin wrote about a house elf who served a good wizard and understood that freedom could be an act of love, not punishment. About a house elf who found in freedom not a curse, but a gift. Pippin dedicated the book to you, Johannes. Without your wisdom and kindness, none of this would have happened. The publisher says the book will cause controversy. Many house elves will be offended by the very idea that freedom can be good. But Pippin is ready for this. Sometimes truth is hard to accept. Pippin also wants to tell you about his newest initiative. Together with several other freed house elves, Pippin is creating a support center for newly freed house elves. This will be a place where they can receive not only practical help, work, housing, but emotional support as well. Pippin knows how important it is to have someone who understands, who has walked the same path and can say, "You are not alone. Everything will be all right." The center will open next month. Pippin will be its first director. It is frightening and exciting at the same time. Johannes, Pippin wants you to know, You did not simply free a house elf. You started a movement that will change the lives of thousands of house elves in the future. With boundless love and gratitude, Pippin. A small booklet was attached to the letter, evidently promotional material for the support center. On the cover was written, "You are not alone. Freedom is a beginning, not an end." Winky stared at these words for a long time. You are not alone. How she would have wanted to hear this a few months ago, when she was drowning in despair and butterbeer. Pippin created a whole place for house elves like Winky, she whispered. Pippin understood that others also needed help, Dobby said. And he did something concrete to help. Winky looked at Dobby, then again at the booklet. Does Dobby think that Winky could do something similar? Dobby smiled. Dobby thinks Winky can do anything she wants. If Winky really wants to. Winky took the last letter from the box. It was shorter than the others and written in a slightly trembling hand. Dear Johannes, Pippin writes to you for the last time. Not because Pippin wants to end the friendship, never, but because Pippin finally understands that he no longer needs support. Pippin is strong. Pippin is happy. Pippin has found his purpose. In 15 years after freedom, Pippin has helped more than 300 house elves find new life. His book has been translated into 7 languages. The support center has opened branches in 12 countries. But most important, Pippin has learned to love himself. Not for what he does for others, but simply for who he is. Johannes, you gave Pippin the most precious gift. You showed him that he was worthy of love and respect. This is a lesson that Pippin now passes on to others. Pippin leaves these letters for those who will come after him. For house elves who are now sitting in darkness and thinking their lives are over. Pippin wants them to know, life is only beginning. Freedom is not a curse. It is the most beautiful gift a living being can receive. Pippin ends this letter with words that have become the motto of his center. You are not alone. You are worthy of love. Your future awaits you. With love for you and all future readers, Pippin. Silence filled the small room. Winky sat with the letter in her hands, feeling tears rolling down her cheeks. But these were not tears of sadness. These were tears of liberation from the burden she had carried for months. Pippin wrote these letters for Winky, she whispered. For people like Winky. For those who think life is over. Dobby reached out and gently touched her shoulder. And now does Winky know that life is only beginning? Winky raised her head and looked into his eyes. In her gaze was a determination that had not been there for months. Yes, she said firmly. Winky knows. And Winky wants. Winky wants to be like Pippin. Winky wants to help others. How? Dobby asked, though his eyes already shone with excitement. Winky does not know exactly, she admitted. But Winky will start with what she does best. Winky will start cooking. With love. With joy. And perhaps if Winky teaches other house elves her secrets of culinary magic, they too will feel that they are special. That they are capable of wonders. Dobby beamed. That is a wonderful idea. Dobby will be Winky's first student. Winky smiled. Sincerely, from the heart smiled for the first time in countless months. Tomorrow Winky will start a new life, she said. Without butterbeer. Without self-pity. Winky will cook with love and teach others. They carefully placed the letters back in the box. But now this did not seem like farewell. It was rather as if they were returning a treasure to its place after it had fulfilled its purpose. Pippin wrote that freedom is the most beautiful gift, Winky said as they walked down the corridor back to the kitchen. Winky feels as if she has just received that gift. You always had it, Dobby said gently. You just didn't know how to use it. Winky stopped in the middle of the corridor and looked at her friend. Dobby, she said seriously, forgive Winky for all these months. Dobby tried to help, and Winky. Dobby understands, he interrupted her. Dobby went through the same thing. Dobby just had Harry Potter to show him the way. And Winky had Pippin. They reached the kitchen, where all was quiet and peaceful. Winky looked around, at the large ovens, copper pots, long preparation tables. For months, all this had seemed like a prison to her. Now she saw possibilities. Dobby, she said, and her voice was full of new life. What if tomorrow morning Winky prepares something special not just for herself? What if Winky prepares breakfast for all the house elves and shows them the recipe? Dobby's eyes shone. You want to start teaching right away? Why not? Winky smiled. Pippin started small, with one article. Winky will start with one recipe. They approached the large shelf with supplies. Winky ran her hand over jars of spices, sacks of flour, pots of honey. For the first time in months, she touched these things not mechanically, but with anticipation of creativity. Magic golden wing pancakes, she said suddenly. Winky knows a secret that other house elves do not even suspect. If you add a drop of dawn sunlight and whisper the right spell, the pancakes will not only be filling, they will give a feeling of warmth and joy for the whole day. Dawn sunlight? Dobby was surprised. How can you add light to batter? Winky smiled mysteriously. It is an ancient secret of house elves. Winky will teach Dobby tomorrow, and all the others who want to learn. She approached the window through which the dim light of stars penetrated. Pippin found his purpose in healing others, she said thoughtfully. Winky will find hers in teaching culinary magic. Not just cooking food, but creating dishes that heal the soul. Dobby approached her. And what if other house elves do not want to learn? What if they say that Winky is putting herself above them? Winky thought about this question. Pippin had also faced resistance when he began writing his articles. But he had not given up. Then Winky will be patient, she said. Pippin wrote that sometimes truth is hard to accept. But if even one house elf feels joy from cooking, if even one understands that he is capable of wonders, it will already be worth it. They stood by the window a little longer, contemplating plans for the future. Winky felt dozens of ideas being born within her. Perhaps she could organize evening classes in culinary magic? Or write a collection of recipes with explanations of why exactly this magic worked. Or maybe even approach Professor Dumbledore with a proposal to create an official course for house elves. Winky, Dobby said quietly. Dobby has never seen Winky glow like this. Winky looked at her reflection in the dark window glass. Indeed, something in her had changed. Not outwardly, she was still the same small house elf with large eyes. But inside something had fundamentally changed. Pippin was right, she said. Life does not end with freedom. It begins. They returned to their sleeping places, but Winky knew she would not sleep. Her mind buzzed with ideas, plans, possibilities. For the first time in months, she eagerly awaited the next day. Lying on her mattress, Winky thought about the strange patterns of fate. Pippin had hidden his letters in the kitchen wall more than 20 years ago. He could not have known who would find them and when. But somehow his words had reached exactly her, exactly when they were most needed. Perhaps this was true magic, not spells and charms, but the ability of one heart to heal another across decades of separation. Thank you, Pippin, she whispered into the darkness. Thank you for showing Winky the way. And though there was no answer, it seemed to Winky that somewhere in the legacy of the magical world, in the foundation of kindness that people and house elves could give to each other, a warm approval echoed. Tomorrow everything would begin anew. But now it would be a true beginning. When Winky finally fell asleep, she did not dream of nightmares about freedom and lost purpose, but of the future. Of a kitchen filled with laughter and learning. Of house elves discovering the joy of creativity for themselves. Of dishes that not only nourished the body, but healed the soul. And somewhere in these dreams she saw the figure of Pippin, not the young house elf who had just received freedom, but a wise mentor who smiled and nodded approvingly. He had fulfilled his mission. His letters had found their addressee. Now it was Winky's turn to continue the work. In the depths of night, when Hogwarts castle slept, magic slowly transformed pain into hope, despair into determination, ending into beginning. And in the small room by the laundry, the ancient box glowed quietly, satisfied that its secret had finally opened to a worthy heart. Pippin's letters had fulfilled their purpose. Winky's story was only beginning. Winky awoke with a feeling she hadn't experienced for months, anticipation of possibilities. But alongside this new sensation came fear. Yesterday evening, reading Pippin's letters, everything had seemed so clear and simple. But now, in the cold light of morning, doubts began to creep back into her heart. What if she was wrong? What if other house elves wouldn't understand? What if she would ruin everything again, as she once had with Mr. Crouch's wand? Winky slowly rose from her mattress, trying to chase away the gloomy thoughts. Pippin had had fears too. She had seen this in his letters. But he had not allowed them to stop him. Making her way to the kitchen, she noticed that her hands were trembling again. Not from butterbeer, she hadn't drunk it for 2 days. From excitement and doubts. The kitchen greeted her with the usual morning sounds. Most of the house elves were already at work, preparing breakfast. Winky stopped at the entrance, suddenly feeling a sharp attack of uncertainty. Last night it had seemed to her that she was ready to teach others, to share her knowledge. But now, looking at the busy house elves, she felt like an imposter. Who was she to teach others? A freed elf who had drowned her sorrows in alcohol for months? Good morning, Winky, came Dobby's cheerful voice. He ran up to her with a big smile. Dobby was waiting for you. Dobby wants to learn about those special pancakes. Winky forced herself to smile, but the smile came out strained. Winky is not sure, she admitted quietly. Perhaps yesterday was a bad idea. Dobby looked at her in surprise. Why bad? Yesterday Winky glowed with joy when she talked about her plans. But that was yesterday, Winky sighed. Today Winky thinks, what if other house elves don't want to listen? What if Winky ruins everything as always? At that moment old Pippin approached them with an angry expression on his wrinkled face. Pippin heard that yesterday someone was telling strange ideas to young house elves, he said sternly. Pippin has worked in this kitchen for 40 years and has never heard such nonsense. Adding sunlight to food, teaching magic that is not needed. Winky felt her heart sink. Here it was, what she had feared. Pippin is right, she mumbled. Winky should not have. No, Dobby interrupted sharply. Pippin is not right. Yesterday Dobby saw how the eyes of young house elves lit up when they learned about new possibilities. Dobby saw how they felt pride in their abilities. Pippin snorted contemptuously. Pride is not for house elves. House elves should serve, not show off. And this, he nodded at Winky, this freed elf has no right to teach others at all. Pippin's words struck straight to the heart. Freed elf. Yes, that was true. She was freed, cast off unwanted. Who was she to teach others? Winky turned away and quickly walked to the furthest corner of the kitchen, where old pots for washing stood. There she sat on a low stool and hid her face in her hands. Perhaps Pippin was right. Perhaps she really was overestimating the significance of Pippin's letters. Perhaps she was just looking for justification for her ambitions, which were out of place for someone like her. Winky, came a gentle voice behind her. She looked up and saw Timmy, the small house elf with large ears who had listened with such enthusiasm to her stories about culinary magic yesterday. Timmy thought all night about yesterday, he said shyly. Timmy never knew that his abilities could be something more than just work. Timmy wants to learn more. Behind him came Willow, the middle-aged house elf who had managed to weave moonlight into a pancake yesterday. Willow wants to learn too, she said determinedly. Willow has worked here 15 years and never felt such joy from cooking as yesterday. But Pippin said, Winky began. Pippin is old and fears change, Willow interrupted. But that doesn't mean changes are bad. Pippin has forgotten that house elves can also grow and develop. Dobby approached them with support in his eyes. Dobby understands Winky's fears, he said. Dobby was also afraid when he first received freedom. But Dobby understood, you cannot let fear control your life. Winky looked at these 3 house elves standing before her with hope in their eyes. Perhaps not all house elves would support her. Perhaps many would agree with Pippin, but these 3 believed in her. Winky does not know if she can teach, she admitted honestly. Winky is still learning to live in a new way herself. Then let's learn together, Timmy suggested. Together is easier. Winky felt something warm sprouting in her heart. Perhaps she wasn't ready to become a great teacher like Pippin, but she could try, could start small. All right, she said, getting up from the stool. But not here. Pippin disapproves, and Winky doesn't want to spoil the working atmosphere. Where then? Willow asked. Winky thought. They needed a place where they could experiment without disturbing others. Do you know the small room by the laundry? She said. There's an old oven there. Winky thinks it can be repaired. Dobby beamed. Dobby knows spells for repairing ovens. Dobby once repaired an oven for the Malfoys. Then tonight, Winky decided, when the main work is finished. The day passed slowly. Winky performed her usual duties, but her thoughts were occupied with plans for the evening. She noticed how Pippin cast unfriendly glances at her, and several other old house elves whispered when she passed by. It hurt, but Winky tried to remember Pippin's words from his letters. That change always provokes resistance, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be implemented. In the evening, when the kitchen quieted, for house elves gathered in the small room by the laundry. The old oven really needed repair. The bricks were cracked, the door closed poorly. Dobby will try, Dobby said, extending his hands toward the oven. He closed his eyes and began muttering a spell. His small hands glowed with greenish light, and gradually the oven began to change. Cracks healed, the door straightened, a clean, even hearth appeared inside. Amazing, Timmy exclaimed. Dobby is so skilled. Dobby blushed from the praise. Dobby learned this over years. The Malfoys always demanded that everything be perfect. And now Dobby uses this knowledge to help friends, Winky said gently. This is also a way to find new purpose for old skills. They lit a fire and began cooking. This time Winky decided not to make the complex pancakes with sunlight. Instead, she taught the basics: how to feel the energy of ingredients, how to put positive emotions into dough, how to understand when a dish was ready not just physically, but magically. Most important is to cook with love, she explained, kneading simple bread dough. When you think about those who will eat your food, when you wish them well, that energy passes into the dish. Timmy tried to repeat, but his bread came out raw inside. It's not working, he sighed. Timmy is not so talented. Timmy, show your hands, Winky requested. He extended his small, thin palms. Winky carefully touched them and felt a strange energy, not warm like hers, but cool, soothing. Timmy has a different gift, she said thoughtfully. Not fiery, but watery. Timmy would be better at preparing dishes that need coolness: ice cream, cold soups, refreshing drinks. Timmy's eyes shone. Really? Timmy can cook something special. Try making lemonade, Winky suggested. But not ordinary. Imagine that you're putting into it the coolness of summer rain, the freshness of morning air. Timmy concentrated, gripping a glass of water. Gradually the liquid became lighter, filled with fine bubbles, and acquired a refreshing aroma. Willow tried a sip and raised her eyebrows in surprise. This is not just lemonade, she said. It's like a sip of cool morning. Timmy beamed with pride, but then suddenly frowned. What if Pippin finds out? What if he says Timmy is wasting time on nonsense? Winky sighed. The resistance of the old house-elves was a more serious problem than she had expected. Timmy, she said gently, Pippin has the right to his opinion. But that doesn't mean his opinion is the only correct one. Everyone has the right to decide how to live. But what if he complains to Professor Dumbledore? Willow worried. This was a fair concern. If house-elves began complaining that Winky was spoiling discipline, the professor might forbid their meetings. Then Winky will speak with Professor Dumbledore, she decided. Winky will tell him about our lessons and ask permission. And if he doesn't allow it? Timmy whispered. Winky thought about Pippin, about how he had overcome resistance and doubts. Then we will continue elsewhere, she said determinedly. But for now, we'll just be more careful. They spent another hour experimenting with simple recipes. Willow proved to be a master of baking. Her cakes were not only delicious, but evoked feelings of coziness and peace. Dobby had a talent for complex dishes that required precision and patience. And Winky gradually understood that teaching was a mutual process. Watching her friends, she herself discovered new aspects of culinary magic. Next time Winky will bring one of Pippin's letters, she said as they prepared to part. There he tells about how he organized his first lessons for other house-elves. Pippin also taught others? Timmy was surprised. Yes, Winky nodded. And he also had difficulties. Not everyone immediately understood his ideas. This reassured the small group. Knowing that even such a successful house-elf as Pippin had faced resistance gave hope. The next few days passed in a tense atmosphere. Pippin indeed complained to Professor Dumbledore, claiming that the freed elf is spoiling young house-elves with her strange ideas. Winky waited for a summons to the headmaster with anxiety in her heart. But when the message finally came to meet Professor Dumbledore in his office, she decided to meet fate with dignity. Climbing the spiral stairs to the headmaster's office, Winky held in her hands one of Pippin's letters, the one where he described his first difficulties with teaching other house-elves. If the professor forbade their lessons, at least she would try to explain her motives. Come in, Winky, came Dumbledore's calm voice when she knocked on the door. The headmaster's office always impressed her. Shelves lined with strange devices, portraits of former headmasters dozing in frames, the magnificent phoenix Fawkes on his perch. Professor Dumbledore sat behind his desk with a cup of tea, looking at her through half-moon spectacles with a gentle but serious expression. Please sit, he invited, indicating a chair opposite the desk. Pippin told me about your educational initiatives. Winky sat on the edge of the chair, prepared for the worst. Professor, she began, Winky can explain. No need to explain, Dumbledore gently interrupted. I have already spoken with Dobby, Timmy, and Willow. They told me what you are doing. Winky's heart stopped. If Dobby had told everything, they said, the headmaster continued, that you teach them to see beauty and joy in their abilities, that you help them understand that their talents are a gift, not just a tool for work. Winky nodded, not trusting her own voice. Also, Dumbledore said, and a familiar twinkle appeared in his eyes, they told me about Pippin's letters. Winky shuddered. She didn't want the professor to think she had been stealing or reading other people's personal belongings. Winky didn't want to. She began. Winky, Dumbledore said gently, I already told you that Pippin left those letters exactly for people like you, for those who needed hope and inspiration. He rose from his chair and approached the window, looking out at the castle grounds. Do you know what happened to Pippin after he left his work near Hogwarts? He asked. From the letters Winky learned that he worked at St. Mungo's hospital, she replied, and that he helped other freed house-elves. Yes, Dumbledore nodded. But that's not all. Pippin created the first school for house-elves in our area, a place where they could develop their unique abilities. The school existed for 20 years and inspired similar initiatives in other places. Winky's eyes widened. A school for house-elves? She had never heard of such a thing. The school closed when Pippin moved to London. The headmaster continued with slight sadness in his voice. But the idea remained. And now perhaps it's time to revive this tradition here at Hogwarts. He turned to Winky, and his gaze was serious and full of expectation. Professor, Winky doesn't understand. I propose that you create an educational program for Hogwarts house-elves, Dumbledore said simply. An official program, approved by the school. You could teach them not only culinary magic, but other skills too, craftsmanship, gardening, care of magical creatures. Winky's head was spinning. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. But Pippin and other old house-elves. She began. Not all changes are accepted easily, Dumbledore agreed. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be implemented. Pippin fears losing traditions he has preserved all his life. This is understandable. But traditions should develop, not stagnate. He returned to his desk and took an official parchment from a drawer. This is permission to create the House-Elf Development Center at Hogwarts, he said, handing the parchment to Winky. You will be its first director. Winky stared at the document, not believing her own eyes. Her name was written in elegant handwriting. Winky, director of the House-Elf Development Center. But Winky is a freed elf, she whispered. Winky has no right. You have every right, Dumbledore said firmly. Pippin was also a freed house-elf when he created his school. And it was exactly this that gave him understanding of what others needed. Winky felt tears filling her eyes. But these were not tears of grief. These were tears of incredible joy and gratitude. Professor, she said in a small voice, Winky doesn't know how to thank. Thank me with your work, Dumbledore smiled. Help Hogwarts house-elves discover their potential. Show them that they can be something more than just servants. He approached her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. And remember, Winky, you are not alone. You have friends who will support you. And somewhere there, in the legacy of the magical world, Pippin's spirit is proud that his ideas found a worthy embodiment. Winky nodded, not trusting her own voice. She firmly gripped the parchment with permission and felt new purpose filling her heart. Leaving the headmaster's office, she thought not about fears and doubts, but about possibilities. About the center she would create. About house-elves she would help find joy in their abilities. About the letter she would someday write to future generations, just as Pippin had once written. Pippin's spirit could indeed be proud. His mission was continuing. 3 months had passed since Winky received official permission to create the House-Elf Development Center. 3 months of persistent work, small victories, and painful failures. 3 months of learning not only to teach others, but herself. The center was housed in a series of rooms in the basement of Hogwarts, not far from the kitchen. Former storage chambers for supplies had been transformed into workshops, classrooms, and a small library. Dobby had helped repair the premises, and Professor Sprout had donated magical plant seeds for the teaching garden. But the hardest part had not been setting up the rooms. The hardest part had been convincing house-elves that they were worth something more. Winky sat in her small office, the first office of her own in her life, and reviewed records about her students. In 3 months, only 8 house-elves had joined her. Not as many as she had hoped, but it was a beginning. Timmy had proved talented at creating refreshing drinks that not only quenched thirst but calmed nerves before exams. Hogwarts students had begun coming to him specifically for his famous Courage Lemonade. Willow had developed her gift of working with moonlight and now baked special night cakes for those who suffered from insomnia. Even Madame Pomfrey acknowledged their effectiveness. But not all stories were successful. Little house elf Pip came to lessons with great enthusiasm, but his attempts always ended in failure. His dishes came out bland, his potions didn't work, and magical plants withered under his care. With each failure he became more upset, and Winky felt increasingly helpless. And there was still resistance from the older house elves. Pippin not only had not made peace with the center's existence, but actively convinced others not to participate in these follies. Several times Winky had caught groups of house-elves who stopped talking when she appeared, and she knew they were discussing her harmful influence. Most painful was that some of her former supporters had begun to doubt. Binns, who had initially listened to her stories with enthusiasm, had stopped coming to lessons after Pippin publicly criticized him for wasting time. Winky rose from her chair and approached the small window through which a piece of sky was visible. She thought about Pippin, about how he had dealt with similar difficulties. In his letters, she could not find ready answers to her current problems. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, turning around. Professor Dumbledore appeared in the doorway. Winky was surprised. The headmaster rarely visited the center, though he always showed interest in its affairs. "Good afternoon, Winky," he greeted with a gentle smile. "Do you have a moment for conversation?" "Of course, Professor," she replied, inviting him to sit. Though Winky fears the news is not very good. Dumbledore sat in the chair opposite her desk and looked at her attentively through his half-moon spectacles. "I have heard about your difficulties," he said calmly. "Pippin is indeed active in his opposition, and some of your students are leaving." Winky nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Perhaps Pippin is right," she sighed. "Perhaps Winky is not capable of such work. Perhaps a freed elf cannot teach others." "Winky," Dumbledore gently interrupted, "do you remember what Pippin wrote in his last letter?" Winky thought. She knew Pippin's letters by heart. "He wrote that freedom is the most beautiful gift," she replied. "Yes," the headmaster nodded. "But he also wrote something else. That the most important thing is to help at least one house elf find hope." Winky recalled these words and felt something stir in her heart. "Timmy found his talent thanks to you," Dumbledore continued. "Willow discovered abilities in herself she didn't know she had. Even if there are no others, these two are already changed forever." "But the others?" Winky began. "Others make their choice," the headmaster said firmly. "You cannot force a house elf to accept freedom of choice if he is not ready. But you can be here for those who are ready." He stood and approached the shelf where several magical devices stood, gifts from grateful students. "Besides," he said with a slight smile, "I have news for you that might lift your spirits." Winky looked at him with interest. "Next week, representatives from other magical schools will come to Hogwarts for an exchange of experience," Dumbledore explained. "Among them will be house elves. I thought it would be interesting to organize joint lessons." Winky's heart beat faster. The opportunity to learn about traditions of other cultures, to share her own knowledge. "That's wonderful," she exclaimed, then became thoughtful. "But what if they think Winky is not up to standard? What if they see how few house elves attend the center?" "Then they will see the truth," Dumbledore replied calmly. "That change does not come easily. That even small steps forward require courage." He approached the door, but on the threshold turned back. "Winky, remember, Pippin did not change the world overnight either. His school existed only 20 years, but influenced hundreds of house elves. And his letters changed your life 2 decades after his time." When the headmaster left, Winky sat in silence for a long time, pondering his words. Perhaps she really was expecting too rapid changes. Perhaps she should focus not on quantity, but on quality. The following days she spent preparing for the guests' arrival. Together with Timmy and Willow, they planned to show the basics of their unique techniques. Dobby helped clean and set up equipment. But the most troubling moment was the meeting with Pip. The small house elf came to her in tears after another failure. "Pip cannot do anything right," he sobbed. "Pip is wasting Winky's time. Pip will go away and not interfere anymore." Winky felt her heart compress. She saw in Pip herself several months ago, disappointed, convinced of her own uselessness. "Pip," she said gently, sitting down beside him on the floor. "Tell Winky what you love doing most." "Pip doesn't know," he sniffled. "Pip can't do anything." "That's not true," Winky insisted. "Every house elf has something special. Sometimes you just have to search for a long time." She remembered how Professor Dumbledore had helped her see her own abilities in a new light. "What does Pip do when he's sad?" she asked. "Pip goes to the garden," the house elf replied quietly. "Pip likes to sit among the plants. They don't tell Pip he's bad." Winky perked up. "And how do the plants behave when Pip is near?" They grow better," Pip said shyly. "But that's probably just coincidence." "Pip," Winky said, feeling excitement, "show Winky the garden." Together they went to the small greenhouse where Professor Sprout had allowed the center to grow teaching plants. And indeed, near those plants where Pip spent more time, the greenery was more lush, the flowers brighter. "Pip has the gift of communicating with plants," Winky said with awe. This is a very rare ability. Even Professor Sprout doesn't have such a strong gift. Pip's eyes lit up with hope. Really? Pip can really do something special. The most special, Winky assured him. And Winky knows how to develop this gift. The following week the guests arrived. Among them were house-elves from Bos-Batons, famous for the refinement of their culinary creations, house-elves from Durmstrang, masters of metalwork and stonework, and even one house-elf from distant Ilvermorny who could speak with magical creatures. At first Winky was nervous, comparing her modest center with the experience the guests had. But gradually she understood that everyone had come here not to judge, but to learn and share. Madame Floreline from Bos-Batons was enchanted by Timmy's abilities. Such a delicate gift for working with water energy, she exclaimed, tasting his soothing tea. In France we call such house-elves friends of springs. House-elf Bjorn from Durmstrang spoke at length with Willow about working with moonlight. In northern countries this is a very respected tradition, he told her. Our ancestors believed that house-elves who can weave moonlight into food can heal spiritual wounds. But Pip made the greatest impression. When he showed the guests how he communicated with plants, the old house-elf from Ilvermorny actually clapped his hands. A natural plant empath, he said. In America such house-elves help heal even the sickest forests. This is a very rare gift. Pip glowed with happiness, and Winky felt pride that warmed her heart. But the strangest moment was the meeting with a house-elf named Celeste from Bos-Batons. She was about the same age as Winky, but her eyes shone with confidence that Winky still lacked. You have created something very important, Celeste said when they sat in the garden after the official part of the program. I heard about the resistance you face. We had the same thing in France 50 years ago. Really? Winky was surprised. Yes, Celeste nodded. My mentor, an old house-elf named Rosalind, also created a similar center. Old house-elves said she was spoiling traditions. Many did not support her. And what happened? Winky asked. She did not give up, Celeste replied simply. She continued working with those who wanted to learn. Gradually others saw the results. Now every French magical school has similar programs. Celeste was quiet for a moment, looking at the starry sky. You know what's most interesting? She said finally. Rosalind told me that her inspiration came from letters of some English house-elf who lived 2 centuries ago. He created the first school for house-elves and wrote about how important it was to share knowledge. Winky's heart stopped. Pippin? Perhaps, Celeste smiled. Rosalind never named him, but she said that his story about creating a school for house-elves showed her. Change is possible, even if it comes slowly. That night Winky could not sleep. She thought about the strange connections between generations, about how ideas are passed through centuries, inspiring new people to change. Pippin had inspired her. She, Celeste in France, and who knows how many more house-elves around the world had begun to believe in the possibility of change thanks to letters, stories, examples of others. The next morning, when the guests were preparing to leave, Celeste approached Winky with a small scroll in her hands. This is a gift from our center, she said. A collection of recipes from French house-elves. But most important, here are addresses of centers in other countries. We maintain contact, share experience. Winky unrolled the scroll and saw a list of addresses from France, Italy, Spain, even distant Japan. You are not alone, Celeste said gently. Around the world there are house-elves doing the same thing you do. We are part of something bigger. When all the guests had left, Winky gathered her students in the main room of the center. There were no longer 8 of them, but 12. Several house-elves had joined after seeing the guests' presentations. Winky wants to tell you something important, she began, holding the list of addresses from Celeste. What we do here is not just our small experiments. This is part of a great movement happening around the world. She told them about the French house-elves, about Rosalind, about centers in other countries. Her students' eyes shone with enthusiasm and pride. But most important, Winky continued, Winky understood that we do this not to prove something to others. We do this for ourselves, to become better, to reveal our potential, to help each other. Timmy raised his hand. What about those who don't support us? Winky thought about Pippin, about house-elves who still looked at the center with suspicion. Everyone has the right to their choice, she replied. Pippin chose to preserve old traditions, and that is his right. We chose to develop and change, and that is our right. She approached the window and looked at the sunny day outside. Pippin wrote in his last letter, When you find your happiness, share it with others. We found joy in developing our talents. Now it's our turn to share this joy. After the lesson, Winky remained alone in the room. She sat at the table and took up a quill. It was time to write her own letter, not to Pippin, who had long died, but to future generations of house-elves who might someday need hope. Dear future reader, if you hold this letter, it means you are going through a difficult time. Perhaps you are a freed house-elf who thinks life is over. Perhaps you serve, but feel you are capable of more. Or perhaps you are simply seeking your path in a world that sometimes seems unfriendly. Winky wants you to know you are not alone. Several months ago, Winky was at the bottom of despair. Winky thought that freedom was the end of everything. But then Winky found letters from a house elf named Pippin, who lived 20 years ago. These letters showed Winky that freedom is not a curse, but an opportunity. Now Winky directs the House Elf Development Center at Hogwarts. This is not always easy. Many house elves do not understand why this is needed. Sometimes Winky doubts whether she is doing right. But then Winky looks at Timmy, who creates drinks that give courage. At Willow, who weaves moonlight into cakes for those who cannot sleep. At Pip, who speaks with plants and helps them grow. And Winky understands, it's not about changing the whole world at once. It's about helping at least one house elf believe in himself. Dear reader, Winky does not know what challenges await you. But Winky knows one thing. You have something special inside you. Perhaps it's a talent for cooking like Winky's. Perhaps it's a gift for communicating with animals, plants, or even with people. Perhaps it's something completely unique. Do not fear to seek this gift. Do not fear to develop it. And most important, do not fear to share it with others. Around the world, there are house elves doing the same thing. In France, Italy, America, Japan. We are all part of something bigger, a movement toward a better future for our people. You too can become part of this movement, can find your path, and help others find theirs. Remember, you are not alone. You are worthy of love and respect. Your future awaits you. With hope and faith in you, Winky, Director of the House Elf Development Center, Hogwarts. P.S. If you are reading this at Hogwarts, know, the center's doors are always open for those ready to learn and grow. And if you are elsewhere, write to me. We will find a way to help each other. Winky set down her quill and reread what she had written. Then she carefully rolled up the letter and placed it in the old box, the same one where Pippin's letters had once lain. Now there were two stories there, one about a house elf who 20 years ago had shown that freedom could be a gift, and one about a house elf who had learned to value this gift and pass it on to others. Winky stood and approached the window. Outside was a beautiful spring day. In Professor Sprout's garden, Pip was working, and around him plants bloomed with doubled strength. Timmy and Willow were experimenting with new recipes in the workshop. Dobby was helping a group of new students get acquainted with the equipment. And somewhere far away, in France, Celeste was probably conducting her lessons. In Italy, Spain, America, other house elves were doing the same, helping their people grow and develop. Winky smiled. She had found her purpose, not the one imposed on her at birth, but the one she had chosen herself. The purpose to teach, inspire, support others on their path to self-realization. Somewhere in the legacy of the magical world, Pippin's spirit was probably smiling. His letters had fulfilled their mission. The circle had closed, but at the same time a new one had opened, a circle of hope that would continue as long as there existed house elves ready to believe in themselves and help others do the same. Winky was no longer a freed house elf without purpose. She was Winky, teacher, friend, part of a great story of change. And this story was only beginning.